In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Atlanta was gripped by fear. A series of tragic disappearances and brutal murders haunted the city's African American community. Over the span of 2 years, more than 28 children, teenagers, and young adults, most of them black males, vanished or were found dead. This period, known as the Atlanta child murders, left an indelible scar on the city and a haunting question that lingers to this day: who was responsible for these horrific crimes?
You mix a warm weekend afternoon with children, and this is what you get: playing. But near each group of children in Southwest Atlanta are the watchful eyes of parents. Parents who have preached over and over about playing in groups, carrying dimes, not talking to strangers. Parents who are worried to death.
It's got to the point that if things don't get any better, I think the mother's going to start teaching the kids at home.
I couldn't find a child anywhere who didn't know about the 8 murdered children. Even the 3-year-olds knew. Anita is 12. Anita, are you aware of the children who have been murdered?
Yes.
How do you know about it?
I was listening to it on the news.
Does it worry you?
Yes.
What do you do about it?
I always have a dime with me, and anything happen, call.
And that's not something they all have memorized and forget. These children showed me their dimes. The kids who had more shared their money with the kids who didn't. 7-year-old Marcus Nelson said he wouldn't play with anyone he doesn't know. And 12-year-old Antonio Howard knew that another 12-year-old boy was found murdered on Friday.
The day I supposed to went to the skating rink, my mom wouldn't let me because she was scared away people snatching out the street. So she told me I couldn't go. Wait till a grown-up go with me. So I had to stay.
Are you mad that you weren't allowed to go, or do you understand her concern?
I understand, because I know she don't want me to get kidnapped.
Neither does any mother. And until, as Mayor Jackson says, this insanity is stopped, mothers will be sticking a lot closer to their children.
The man accused of these heinous acts was Wayne Williams, a local freelance photographer and music promoter. In 1981, he was arrested and later convicted, not for the murder of any children, but for the deaths of 2 adult men, Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne. His conviction was based on fiber evidence and circumstantial links, but the prosecution used these cases to implicate him in the broader string of child murders. To this day, Wayne Williams has never been formally charged or convicted of the murders of any of the children.
Jackson's death fits the pattern of the others. A young black male, possibly strangled, his body discovered almost 3.5 weeks after the last victim's body was found. The boy lived here with his father and 2 sisters. Aaron Jackson Sr. went to work Saturday. His boy was asleep. When he came home, the boy was gone. The father thought he was spending the night with a friend. He wasn't. Jackson Sr. realized his son had been murdered 24 hours later when he recognized the shoe attached to the body on the 11 o'clock news.
The problem is that our children are being abducted from the streets, and in 11 instances, they have turned up dead. In that case, we all have to do things that are extraordinary. We cannot, as a community, as a city, carry on business as usual. Parents are going to have to exercise some extraordinary parental responsibilities.
An unusual sight today were these task force members going door to door in the boy's neighborhood. Other officers were back at the murder scene. Commissioner Brown has now increased the size of the task force and says Atlanta will get tough with kids seen walking alone after dark. This latest death is apparently connected to the others, but investigators are stumped, having only a few clues and the bodies of 11 black children. Ernie Bjorkman, Action News Tonight.
Williams has maintained his innocence for over 4 decades, asserting that he was a convenient scapegoat during a time of intense public pressure to solve the crimes. Despite the conviction, questions remain about the investigation, the evidence, and whether the real killer or killers were ever brought to justice. The story of Wayne Williams and the Atlanta child murders is one of controversy, doubt, and unresolved grief. As we look back on this dark chapter of Atlanta's history, we must confront the uncomfortable truths about the case and ask ourselves, was justice truly served, or does the shadow of the Atlanta child murders still linger, casting doubt on the fate of the man accused and the search for the real truth behind the tragedy?
After nearly 40 years, the investigation into the Atlanta child murders is back open. There's longtime suspect Wayne Williams, but another investigation stayed almost entirely under the radar for decades until now. In a story you will only see here, 11 Alive's Naima Abdullahi combs through thousands of documents originally uncovered by 11 Alive more than 30 years ago, bringing you details of the secret investigation into the KKK's possible connection to the Atlanta child murders.
Explain to us what we're looking at.
This is the official Missing and Murdered Children's Task Force file. These are approximately 30,000 pages.
Retired 11 Alive journalist Paul Crawley covered the case extensively as the nightmare unfolded, terrorizing Atlanta's black neighborhoods between 1979 to 1981. But there was a separate, top-secret investigation that was apparently withheld from the public because Atlanta was, quote, faced with an extremely explosive racial problem, end quote. The KKK investigation, which was referred to as the 8100 file, investigated claims suggesting the Ku Klux Klan could be responsible for the Atlanta child murders. According to the documents, the investigation lasted for 2 months and ended a month before Wayne Williams was considered a suspect. The 8100 file was not presented during the Wayne Williams trial. Former juror Clarice Flournoy Green helped convict Williams, who's serving a life sentence for the murder of 2 adult men.
How y'all doing?
He was linked to the child murders, but was never convicted.
Here you are, an Atlantan, and you're convicting an Atlantan, and a young black male at that.
She stands behind her decision based on the evidence that was available.
Do you feel if this was presented during that time that maybe it could have changed the hearts and minds of some of the jurors who were sitting in the courtroom with you?
It may have, depending on what's all in there, since we didn't get a chance to see it.
The operation includes weeks of physical surveillance, wiretaps on phone conversations, polygraph tests, and information from informants who knew the Klan members. The investigation closely focused on the death of 14-year-old Luby Jeter, outlining information that a Klan member was responsible for his murder. According to documents, the then GBI director, Phil Peters, asked for it to be kept a separate investigation, that if the investigation, quote, leaked out, it would possibly cause a race riot, end quote. Documents indicate that Klansmen were followed for weeks to find a link between them and victim Luby Jeter, who apparently came in contact with one of them after he bumped his go-kart on a Klan member's car. The informant stated that the Klansman was angered by that and, quote, admitted that he wanted to kill Jeter, end quote. Luby Jeter's body was found February 5th, 1981. Documents reveal the conversations that were monitored. The informant claimed a Klansman asked him to help on the child murders. He was given a polygraph test and passed. The source advised that the KKK was, quote, creating an uprising among the blacks, that they were killing the children, and that they are going to do one each month until things blow up, end quote. 2 months after the investigation started, the 8100 file says the Klansmen were brought in for questioning and given a polygraph test and passed. According to the documents, that's when the investigation was considered closed. Based on 11 Alive archived reports, we found out what happened to the audio recordings of the wiretaps.
That the tapes were in fact destroyed, that they were destroyed in July of 1981. Now that's 1 month after Wayne Williams was arrested, and the same month he was indicted for 2 of the black youth slayings.
Decades after the killing spree started, the debate of who did it still continues. Crawley says this story remains just as complicated as the day he started reporting on it.
It was pretty frightening for all of us, because we knew that whoever it was out there watching everything we did and said, and that was pretty scary.
38 years later, police are now tasked to find out if the killer is still out there, watching, or if it's the man currently locked up.
Wayne Williams told reporters at a press conference in June that he didn't know any of the victims on the task force list. Investigators immediately began beating the bushes then, and the first evidence that Williams may have been lying came from this Atlanta family. The FBI found John Laster, his brother Lou Jean, and niece Michelle Davis shortly after Williams became a suspect. John told agents and the jury today that he was good friends with Joseph Bell and that both knew Wayne Williams through a radio advertisement promoting his talent agency.
Well, he said he know. Huh? He said he know. And I told him one day I was going to school. He said, I know him.
JoJo knew Wayne?
Mm-hmm.
Did he say why you knew him?
He said something like he heard him on the radio or something, he was pronouncing that on the radio about, lifting kids up for a career or something.
John's brother, Lou Jean, had even stronger testimony, telling the court he saw Bell get into a car with Williams the day the victim disappeared. But by far the most credible and damaging witness for the state was this man, identified today as Kent Hinsman. I talked with him last June after FBI agents heard his story. Hinsman repeated that testimony today, how he met Williams at a local recording studio back in 1980. And there with Williams was a teenager by the name of Joseph JoJo Bell.
That particular evening, that many people didn't show up. I remember JoJo because he came in and he sang for a few, he sang a few tunes, and he had a very good voice. And I was asking Wayne what was he going to do with him. Wayne said he was going to sign the guy to a contract immediately. The reason that this guy stands out so much in my mind is because I rode back downtown with Wayne Williams, a girl by the name of Carla, and JoJo Bell.
In a very dramatic part of his testimony, Hinsman recalled a conversation he had with the suspect about the child murders.
I asked him once, I told him I felt like I was on the same wavelength with this killer. He said, yeah, he kind of shied away from it. Once we were discussing something about the kids, and he said, they ought to keep their asses at home. Maybe they wouldn't get caught, and moms ought to take better care of them.
How y'all doing?
On September 4th, 1981, 3 months before his trial for 2 of Atlanta's black youth murders, Wayne Williams' attorneys asked the court for any prosecution evidence that might clear him. The prosecution said there was none. Judge Clarence Cooper agreed to study everything the prosecution had. 2 months later, after personally reviewing files of the Special Police Task Force, Judge Cooper turned over volumes of material to the defense. Nowhere was there any mention of an investigation into possible Ku Klux Klan involvement in the murders. But 9 months before, a handful of Atlanta police officers and GBI agents had begun a top-secret Klan probe known as the 8100 file. According to the file, then GBI Director Phil Peters ordered it kept secret, even from the task force, for fear that, quote, if the intelligence leaked out, it would possibly cause a race riot, end quote. But even if the task force didn't know about the Klan probe, its leadership did. According to the file, then Assistant Atlanta Police Chief Morris Redding, who headed the task force, was briefed on at least 2 occasions. He gave his approval of the operation, but later expressed doubt about Klan involvement in the murders. GBI agent Robbie Hamrick, head of the task force detectives, is quoted as saying that only he and Redding were to know of the secret Klan probe, and he would act as liaison with the task force. Then Atlanta Police Chief George Napper was also briefed on the operation and gave his approval. He is quoted in the file as saying, quote, do not let this out, end quote. If top police officials knew, what about prosecutors? About midway through the investigation, the file mentions that one of the officers involved attempted to reach an assistant Fulton County district attorney, but apparently no contact was made. The assistant DA named in the file told 11 Alive News this week that he has never been told of any Klan investigation. 2 days later, the file contains a vague reference which states, quote, office advised Heat, DA's office, end quote. This morning, Fulton County District Attorney Lewis Slayton, who prosecuted Williams, declined to comment on camera, but told me he didn't know about the secret Klan probe until just a few months ago, and that he has never seen the 8100 file. In a statement issued through his office today, Judge Clarence Cooper, who turned over much of the task force files to Williams' defense, said he only knew what the district attorney knew. In his latest bid for a new trial, convicted murderer Wayne Williams went before a Butts County judge in February, asking that his attorneys be allowed to question police about possible KKK involvement in the Atlanta child murder case. Last month, 3 lawmen gave depositions, which have been obtained by the USA Today newspaper and shared with 11 Alive News. They describe a top-secret probe known as the 8100 file. So secret, it was limited to only a handful of lawmen and kept from the special task force investigating the murders for fear of leaks. It was kept secret for fear that its very existence could have sparked a race war during Atlanta's tense nightmare of the early 80s. It contained evidence from an informant that a Klansman had threatened to kill Lubie Jeter weeks before he was strangled and promised to kill others. In his deposition, Atlanta Police Major Herman Greiner admitted he considered the Klansman a prime suspect. But GBI agent Joe Jackson Jr., who headed the special probe, said he brought it to an end after concluding, quote, there was absolutely no truth in these accusations, end quote. In a third deposition, former Atlanta police investigator Aubrey Melton said the informant told him GBI agent Jackson had revealed his name to the suspect, blowing his cover. Saying he couldn't remember exactly when, Agent Jackson admitted tape recordings between the Klansman and the informant had been destroyed. Today, an assistant state attorney general who declined to be interviewed on camera confirmed for 11 Alive News that the tapes were in fact destroyed, that they were destroyed in July of 1981. Now, that's 1 month after Wayne Williams was arrested, and the same month he was indicted for 2 of the black youth slayings. But both that attorney general and the GBI insist it was routine house cleaning of worthless material. Interviewed at his Somerville office today by 11 Alive's Don Hatcher, attorney Bobby Lee Cook, who is working on Wayne Williams' appeal, called the routine house cleaning a routine cover-up.
I find it perfectly incredible and alarming to my sense of judgment and hopefully to some degree of common sense that these type tape recordings could have been destroyed approximately 2 weeks after Wayne Williams was indicted in this case, and without giving the court or the district attorney any effort to analyze or to evaluate this evidence. I find it shocking.
Attorney Cook claims that if the secret Klan investigation had been turned over to the court, it could have resulted in a not guilty verdict for Wayne Williams. In the near future, they hope what remains of the file and the fact that it was kept secret until recently at least will be grounds enough for a new trial. Paul Crawley, 11 Alive News. February 17, 1981, friends and relatives gather for the funeral of 11-year-old Patrick Baltazar. He is the 19th young black slain in 18 months. 2 days later, 13-year-old Curtis Walker is reported missing. In the day between the burial of one child and the disappearance of another, a longtime informant contacts a special investigator on the Atlanta police force who is not involved in the child murder case. The informant claims a member of the Ku Klux Klan has tried to recruit him to help kill young blacks. He warns the Klan is arming for a race war, and he's been told, quote, they are going to do one each month until things blow up, end quote. The informant says at first he, quote, thought it was just Klan talk, but changed his mind after the Jeter boy was reported missing, end quote. 14-year-old Lubie Jeter's body had been found 2 weeks earlier. The informant says the same Klansman had threatened to kill Jeter several months before, when Jeter had run into his car with a go-kart. The informant is given a polygraph by the GBI, whose agent concludes that, quote, the source had related the truth in all areas of the investigation, end quote. At about the same time, a second informant, unknown to the first, came forward with similar information about the same Klansman. The second informant theorized that a 6-member Klan guerrilla unit may be doing the killings, assisted by a black policeman, possibly as some sort of initiation rite for advancement in the Klan. But this source admits he isn't certain about the truth of his information. A handful of GBI and Atlanta police officers began a top-secret investigation known as the 8100 file. It is kept separate from the Special Task Force. The reason cited by then GBI Director Phil Peters is the fear that, quote, if the intelligence leaked out, it would possibly cause a race riot, end quote. After more than a month of clandestine surveillance of 3 Klan suspects and wiretaps on their phones, there is no solid evidence to confirm their involvement in the killings, which have continued to happen. The only hint is a phone conversation between 2 of the Klan suspects on April 1st, when one says he may, quote, go find another little kid, end quote. 3 weeks later, on April 24th, the 3 Klan suspects are brought to GBI headquarters where they voluntarily submit to polygraph tests. According to the examiner, the results indicate, quote, none of them had any involvement whatsoever in the murders, end quote. When asked about the April 1st phone call in which he said he may go find another kid, one of the Klansmen says it was just an inside joke. In the meantime, the GBI Crime Lab reports that hairs from a mixed-breed German Shepherd Husky dog, owned by one of the Klansmen, do not match dog hairs found on some of the victims. Results from any fiber evidence are not noted in the file. The case is closed 9 weeks after it had begun, 4 weeks before Wayne Williams surfaced as a suspect.
This witness, Robert Henry, did place Wayne Williams with the very last victim, Nathaniel Cater. Henry worked with Cater. He said he saw him leaving this theater with Williams on the night of the bridge incident. Henry has no doubt, even today, about what he saw.
We were holding hands, you know, like male and female. Well, if you were holding hands with one of my co-workers and both of you are males, what am I supposed to do? Turn my head?
What's up, people?
When Wayne Williams took the stand, he swore he never met Nathaniel Cater. On the evening Henry said he saw them, Wayne testified he was home, sick and asleep in bed. His mother and father, now deceased, backed him up. Homer Williams said he had the white station wagon until almost midnight. Under cross-examination, in his third day on the stand, Wayne Williams blew up at prosecutor Jack Mallard.
That morning he was a complete different person. Immediately he started attacking. He came out of the chute like a bull. When he said, you want the real Wayne Williams, you've got him. I think all of us, the jury, understood that, yeah.
I was probably my own worst enemy. I was an arrogant, bus-headed idiot at the time, and I played right into these people's hands. I could see almost the shock in the jurors' faces if they said, my God, is this the same Wayne that was up here yesterday? I could see that.
When you got angry with the prosecutor, you said, you're a drop shot.
I called him a drop shot.
What's a drop shot? What's that mean?
Quite simply, in our vernacular, a drop shot is a guy who's not worth much of anything. You know, just drop him and shoot him and get him out of the way. In other words, you're useless.
We reminded Wayne that he also called poor black children on the streets the same thing, drop shots.
That does not make me a murderer simply because I said somebody is a drop shot or because I called him a drop shot. That does not make Wayne Williams a murderer because I say somebody is a street urchin. You know, come on, we're talking about murder. The fact is, I didn't kill anybody.
Patrick Baltazar's stepmother was watching in court that day.
I'm like, this man gotta be crazy. This man, I mean, it's like he's saying, you know, yeah, I killed him, but you better prove it. You know, can you prove it? He was doing everything he can to outsmart everybody. And it was like, I did it, but can you prove I did it?
The jury didn't come back until late the second evening. The verdict, guilty on both counts of murder. Wayne Williams was sentenced to serve 2 life terms.
People only wanted to look at the negative side because they wanted in their heart for this case to be over and for Wayne to be the Atlanta monster. They wanted closure at any cost.
Defamation is a statement that injures a third party's reputation. The tort of defamation includes both libel, written statements, and slander, spoken statements. State common law and statutory law governs defamation actions, and each state varies in their standards for defamation and potential damages. Defamation is a tricky area of law as the lines between stating an opinion versus a fact can be vague, and defamation tests the limits of the First Amendment freedoms of speech and press. All of these apply in Wayne Williams' case. Not to minimize the convictions of the 2 murders that he is convicted of, nevertheless to be labeled as technically the only black serial killer / psychopath is a little too much. From a New York Times article covering the case, it was noted that, as follows: 2 defense witnesses testified at the murder trial of Wayne B. Williams today that Mr. Williams had expressed a dislike for homosexuals. Prosecutors have asserted that Mr. Williams is a homosexual and that his sexual preference played a part in the deaths of the 2 young black men he is accused of killing. Mr. Williams has pleaded not guilty in the slayings of Nathaniel Cater, 27 years old, and Jimmy Ray Payne, 21, 2 of 28 young blacks whose deaths over a 22-month period have been investigated by a special police team. No arrests have been made in the 26 other cases, but prosecutors have presented evidence in 10 additional deaths in an effort to show a pattern that might fit the Cater and Payne slayings. Aversion to homosexuals. Carla Bailey, a business associate of Mr. Williams, testified that Mr. Williams had derogatorily referred to homosexuals as Twinkies and wished not to be in their presence. With this, it is a belief that this is what helped convict and place the child murderer label on Wayne Williams. He was a homosexual at a time that it wasn't accepted by society as it is now, then.
Outside Police Chief Napper's office, the reminder is still there. But though homicide files show 6 juveniles murdered since the arrest of Wayne Williams, none bears the once common links to the city's string of child murders.
It's hard not to have been sensitized by the recent experience with the missing murdered kids. There is no reason for our investigators at this point to feel that they're linked or that we're experiencing another kind of problem. But we keep open the possibility that there may be some linkages, but there's nothing at this point to indicate that there are.
Excluding task force victims, the number of people under 17 murdered in Atlanta has increased each year recently. In 1978, for instance, there were 3 murders. In 1979, 6. In 1980, 7 children were murdered. And this year, the number has already doubled to 14. But most of the cases are quickly solved. Only 2 from this year are still open. And in the city's most recent murder, a teenager shot this weekend, the case has already been closed. The homicide squad does miss the 5 detectives still assigned to the task force. Behind its closed doors, investigators still work on the 26 unsolved child murders and prepare evidence in the 2 where an arrest has been made. But just 35 people now make up the force, down from a peak of 102. But though its numbers have been reduced, police officials say there are no plans now to disband the task force. They tell me they still feel it is the best method of handling this investigation. Do you need those people back? Would you like to have them back?
Well, we would always like to have more people on the streets for visibility purposes. I think in due time we'll get them back. There's certainly a priority to be given to what they're doing, and when we feel that there's nothing more for them to do over there, we'll bring them back.
Calls to the task force, which used to come in hundreds a day, have now dwindled to almost none. But in the missing persons department, officials say they're getting just as many calls as ever about missing children, though most are found right away. Investigators say the legacy of the past 2 years may be that now no one assumes a child will come home. Hank Philippi, Action News.
You come up with your own conclusion to this case, however, for the pursuit of justice and equality, it just doesn't add up. What do you think?